Ah. Solokonsert for dirigent is by the composer Anders Jallen from 1973. The piece is for conductor who is solo. And what does that mean exactly? It means that the conductor is by him or herself, perhaps standing on a podium. Is there an audience? Solo could imply that there is no audience. But I treat it as if there were an audience. And at first I thought, well, if I'm going to perform this, I should be in the traditional role of conductor where my back is to the audience. But that offered, let's say, some possibilities, but also created some problems. I'll show you. Well, you see, of course, that you don't see. You miss a lot because it's obscured by my back, and you don't really know what's happening in the same way. There is no connection. And so it became clear that the best way to perform it was, in fact, facing the audience as if the audience were perhaps just behind the orchestra, with the orchestra in between. Or, of course, once I started performing it like that, I realized that you could just imagine the orchestra away entirely. So the audience would become the receptor of my gestures as a conductor. So, in that sense, solo conductor without an orchestra. On the other hand, when you're conducting, you don't want to conduct, let's say, to the audience who's not performing. So you have to perhaps imagine an orchestra. You have to imagine different players in different sections and even score it in your mind, knowing, okay, there I'm going to bring in the clarinets, there I'm going to bring in the violins, whatever it is, there are going to be the double basses. And so by having those in your mind, then you create a sort of a spatialization of the piece for yourself as the performer. But performing it like that, I also realized that by doing so, by having in my mind's eye certain places in the room that were going to be certain instruments or cued at certain points, that I was also creating contact with the audience members who were there. And what that engendered, and this was one of the greatest moments of performing this piece ever, was that at one point I'm conducting this piece for an audience, and someone in the audience decides to start singing. And the conclusion he had come to was that my gestures were the cues for the audience to participate as musicians, which actually makes total sense. And why not? Because if I'm conducting and if there is no orchestra, then let the audience participate. And so that opened up new possibilities. And I think there you have, okay, the orchestra is silenced. It's just the conductor, but the conductor is always silenced. The conductor is inherently silent. Conductor never makes any sound. In this piece, there's one exception. On the next to the last line, I say, ah. But by saying that, ah, I'm only sort of underscoring. It's like a marker for the silence itself. I'm underscoring the fact that otherwise you never hear the conductor. And all you hear is the rustling of my coat, or possibly my baton when it hits the stand, or when it hits something else by accident, my own body, or when it cuts through the air very fast. So what I like about this piece is all these different layers of silence, which are created, enhanced, and enabled by the piece, by the very simple nature of having a piece which is just consisting of rest for someone who's standing there and doesn't have an instrument. And so how does it sound? And what are the sounds of those silences sort of layered on top of each other?